Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Thursday, August 24th, 2017, and we're supposed to be back on the air live. Fingers crossed that everything is working exactly as expected. Justice says yes, and I think we may finally have gotten the hang of this system. Doesn't mean we're not going to replace it with a more robust computer to make sure that things move more smoothly. Now that I am back at home at Kagro in the Morning World headquarters and in a position to receive said package, I can go ahead and make that order. And all of you who have contributed, thank you very much to the for the capital improvements we will be making to the Kagro in the Morning show. And hopefully this will eliminate most, if not all, of the problems we've encountered, plus give us some backup in the case of super duper emergency. I've been away for a week, but as you may know, I was sending some recorded shows your way. I'm not entirely clear on what happened last week. I don't know if Donald Trump said anything or did anything or whether there were large gatherings of people. All I know is that sometime around Monday I went outside, the sun disappeared. I did not hang around to see what happened afterwards. I am not sure if it's back yet. I haven't gone outside. That is not true, but for all intents and purposes, I did notice in the eclipse observations where I was in place outside of Charleston, South Carolina, and in the path of totality, and we got about the worst weather that you could possibly get for such a thing. But I did notice that basically once it became a total eclipse and everybody saw it for a little while, everybody picked up their chairs and left. We were all very excited watching the sun be eclipsed, but the show went on for another hour or so, and everybody seemed to go inside. Well, that's it. There's no more sun anymore. Time for us to go in and watch television. I don't know if that was true wherever you went. How many of you made it to the path of totality to view some part of it, or did you stay at home and enjoy the partial eclipse? It was not as jam-packed as I thought it was going to be, but like I said, we were outside of Charleston and in the suburbs, and no one was going to come to our little cul-de-sac and force their way in to watch the eclipse near us. Anyway, it was quite enjoyable. We did get to see it just a little bit, and so at least I saw what looked like a solar disk with a circle of black in the middle. Very interesting. I'm going to try again in 2024, I'm sure. And let's see, what else can I tell you about my super duper vacation? Well, I did hear a lot about what happened. I did not get to see the Phoenix speech. Was it Phoenix that he did I think so. Phoenix, Arizona speech. And so I'm not really up to speed on that one. I did watch a little bit of Twitter watching it, and I heard about some of the most egregious things that were said, but I think I've kind of given up on worrying about what he says at these rallies and critiquing what he says at these rallies, because it's almost impossible. And it doesn't really seem to make a dent in his head anyway. This morning, I understand he's out there tweeting with his normal spelling errors, but I haven't yet caught up on exactly what he's babbling about. Bill in Portland, Maine, back in place after his travels, says, well, let's see, we've got Kagro X in the morning here, and let's see, Daily Co's Radio live again, Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman. Hi, everybody, I'm back. And it says right here, I am back and ready to be driven nuts by Trump all over again. I may have to stop being driven nuts by that guy, but it makes for good radio show fodder. Let's see, by the way, up in Maine, about 50% coverage, because we're sensible centrists, he says. And I like your hashtags. Third way, no labels. Very good. I kick the can. The sun kicks back, all the good stuff that we've come to expect from our third way friends. 50% coverage. It is interesting to see how far you have to go up north or south, I guess, in order to make a difference in how much coverage. If you go south of totality, did you just see partial coverage from the other side or what? I'm not really sure about that. I'll check into it. Gideon, hi. How are you, Gideon? Gideon chiming in from overseas once again. How is the mood in Virginia after Charlottesville? That's a good question. I think you would really have to go to Charlottesville to get a read on that. I don't think it's pervaded Virginia as a whole, at least. But I will say I wasn't in Virginia for much of the aftermath, but it's certainly something that resonates everywhere, even up here in Northern Virginia. Charlottesville is sort of central, and so a bit to the west and about 2 hours or so drive-wise south from us. But the bigger, I guess the bigger issue is it is, of course, the home of the University of Virginia, and so lots of kids are returning. A lot of families sending their kids back to school in Charlottesville. We don't have anyone in school there at the moment, but it's certainly a prospect for our older son. And it gave us a little bit of a fright to see that. Thankfully, the school seems to be standing pretty strong, and it was they were the major source of opposition to the invaders, really, the University of Virginia community, the recent alumni, people who have stayed behind in Charlottesville since graduation. It keeps it a pretty progressive city in what should otherwise be a pretty red area. So I hold out a lot of high hopes for their ability to stay strong there and push back and not have that happen again. Greg Dworkin, back for the first time in, about a week or so, maybe more.
Maybe more.
Yeah, maybe
2 weeks.
Thousands of years for all I know.
Maybe
Frozen
3 or
in
7.
the ice. Okay, well, I've lost count, but I do think I'm glad to have you back. It looks like everything's working. I tested my Skype to be sure I didn't want that disaster to be back on here and not have Skype working.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Can you hear me now?
Am I glad I can hear you? Yes.
What about now?
Yes, still true. And you can do this for an hour.
So the thing is, it's an itch. David and I were talking about this back channel a little bit. There are people that tell me that the live version of the show sounds a little bit different than the podcast.
That could
where
be.
the podcast is perfect sound and the live version sometimes sounds a little bit distant. So we'll see how that goes over time.
Yeah, well, we'll have to figure that out and see if I'm still playing with the knobs and dials, and it'll probably all start all over again when we get the new computer in here. But the good thing is it will cost more. So there's that.
Yeah. You mean I have to pay more to get on the show?
Yes. Like video games, when you keep saying put a quarter in, it's up to 50 cents.
Right. Oh, my goodness.
Inflation. But it vibrates.
So in terms of Charlottesville,
yes.
I mean, there's so much to talk about, so little time. But in terms of Charlottesville, I've been relying, in terms of what it feels like, on Larry Sabato, who is, a political expert, and he happens to be based in Charlottesville.
Right.
And he's written a bit about it, and he's been interviewed a bit about it. And the interesting thing, which is sort of interesting in a backhanded way, is how I can relate to what Charlottesville must be feeling based on what happened in Newtown and how the rest of the state reacted to Newtown. When you're on the ground and you're right there, and basically he could see all of this from his lawn. It's one thing. And then, you get 10 miles away, 20 miles away, but it's still the same state. It still has a big impact and hits you in the gut. And then the further away you get, it's more like just reading the news about something that happened across, the country or on the other coast. And he reacted to it, I think, the way most people did. Just an awful event, well aware of the history of the place, underlying issues. For example, how race plays in Charlottesville has a lot to do with how it's been gentrified, just, as one example. But also reacted primarily to Trump's reaction. The Saturday disgraceful statement, I was going to try to be a little bit more presidential, and then, the whole thing fell apart. And then, of course, he had the Phoenix rally where everything fell apart, and we'll go over a lot of that. But it was a lot of whiplash. And I can tell you, when something like that happens to your town, you're looking to the White House for healing and for a little bit of leadership. And when you don't get it, it hurts twice as much.
Yeah, it does make things worse. And there's no doubt, I mean, he's going to make everything worse. That's always true. I'm not too surprised about that. And by the way, I'm glad we're straight on this. Rebecca Roman says that she thought Gideon was asking how the food was in Virginia after Charlottesville. It's delicious. It's still fine.
That's
but
good.
The mood did sour a bit.
Well, maybe there is something wrong with the live feed. We'll have to check in on that.
That could be it.
If that's the case. So I'm talking with my friend Dennis, also known as Kagro in the morning. No, that's not a sound check. I was just kidding.
Okay.
Let's talk about some things that happened. There's so much and so little time, but let's round up a little bit. But also bring in some stuff that's going to happen now. Some of this feels like ancient history. Some of it, unfortunately, doesn't. But one of the things that's happening now is the question of whether or not the government's going to stay open.
Oh, yeah. Right. That thing.
Yeah. And so, of course, sometimes this gets to be a politics thing. Sometimes it gets to be a procedural thing. But there's an interesting story in Axios this morning. Government shutdown chances rising by the day.
What do you know?
For example, Goldman Sachs and guidance to investors last Friday pegged the odds at 50-50. Okay. A top Republican source put the chance of a government shutdown as high as 75%.
Yeah.
And said the peculiar part was almost everybody I talked to on the Hill agrees that it's more likely than not. Axios says it all comes down to Trump's mood, or it may. The president is spoiling for a fight, and the conservative House Freedom Caucus hasn't had a fight in a while, and that's a dangerous dynamic. So remember, the 9-year-olds who are running the country may wind up shutting the government down, thereby increasing chances for a Democratic takeover of the House. Because they feel like fighting.
Okay. Well, then I guess they should.
Right. Now, here's where the process comes in. Axios says, based on funding mechanisms, the showdown could either come in September or December.
Yes, I guess so.
Officials at both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue, who are up to their necks in tax reform, think passage probably doesn't happen until next year, but a September showdown could be better for tax reform than a Christmas showdown because it would allow conservatives and Trump to get it out of their system. Again, it's interesting, not just the aides in the White House, but reporters covering Washington are now treating the people in power as if they're 9-year-olds.
Yes.
Which, by the way, is smart because they are.
Right. I mean, that's the best way I can think of to describe it.
Right. And everything will make a lot more sense if you look at it through that lens.
Yeah.
Democrats feel certain they have Trump boxed in and see no reason to compromise or help. Trump is at war with Senate Leader McConnell. There was a nice story in the New York Times about how they're not on speaking terms. They were cursing each other out on the phone, and that's that bad.
And
several other Republicans complicating communications and compromising trust. Congressional leadership doesn't want a shutdown and can pass the fall bare necessities, continuing resolution, debt ceiling, children's health insurance program, using mostly Democratic votes. But the Freedom Caucus will hammer, it sounds so familiar. Didn't we go through this with Boehner? But the Freedom Caucus will hammer Ryan for doing so, and conservatives in the Senate will hammer Leader McConnell. And by the way, none of that will make any difference because they don't have any alternatives to those people. So my point of view, and, David can set us straight, but my point of view is still they got hammered. So what? Who's going to replace them? Their jobs aren't in jeopardy. Just do what you need to do. I don't understand why they don't do that, but then again, I got to remind myself these are 9-year-olds, not actual grown-ups. Be smart. With the departure of Steve Bannon, Trump is surrounded more and more by conventional mainstream folks, which could actually make him feel more compelled to buck them.
We can't tell what to expect from any of this. I mean, Bannon being gone, is it good? Is it bad? Does it change him? Does it not change him? Does it force him to say, just because you think I'm going to change because he's gone means I'm going to redouble my efforts not to change. But who knows what that means in his head?
Yeah. And, basically, there's no point in trying to predict or analyze Trump because this is somebody who reacts to the moment. You could tell that, and just stick him in front of different crowds, you're going to get completely different reactions. And Philip Rucker had a piece about that in the Washington Post. Trump's whiplash, 3 personas and 3 speeches, but the same president. Rucker got into trouble for this this Where We're Going in Afghanistan speech, which was basically a teleprompter speech that Trump read.
Right.
And Rucker tweeted something along, well, this was really presidential, and just got hammered saying, would you please stop? Just give that up. And of course, the very next day, had this wild Phoenix, I think it was the very next day. It's hard to tell. Everything blends together.
I think
with Trump.
so, yeah.
But then went to Phoenix and had this 75-minute id rant, us versus them, attacking people in the media, essentially telling his constituents and rally goers that they're the enemy. Really scary stuff, because people get hurt when you do stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then has a speech in front of, I guess, the American Legion, where he was, again, teleprompter Trump and unity Trump. Everybody should get together. We're one country, this, that, and everything else. You know that when he's reading from a speech that Kelly or somebody wrote for him or directed him to say, that it's not really him. Right. And then when he's ranting in Phoenix, that is him. Yes. And again, like you said about the Bannon thing, the more he's told to toe the line, he'll do it. And like a recalcitrant 9-year-old, then rebel and just do the opposite as soon as he can. Yeah. So that's why looking at them like children is actually a very good idea. I think, you get a real idea what's going on. Now, here's a piece from Sarah Kendzior.
Oh, yes.
Sarah Kendzior, Kendzior, Globe and Mail. She's based in St. Louis, but she writes about politics and authoritarianism. She's very good. And the title of her piece is called "The Trump Ship May Finally Be Sinking."
Ship. Yes, P. Right, okay.
Right?
Because ships float.
Ship. Yeah. Yeah. And that's why it's so important to get the sound quality right for these live shows.
Okay.
Because otherwise you're going to get banned in Rochester, and all these other places that have us on the air. The Trump ship, P, may finally be sinking, and talks about all the different areas where people are leaving. I think just this morning I was reading that rabbis are refusing to get on the phone to talk about a nonpartisan conference call with Trump. We had people leave all sorts of different committees and advisory groups. He's basically lost the rich people, which is really kind of interesting.
Right. Where did we put them last? I don't know, but they keep leaving. That's true. Lots of resignations, not, important like cabinet ones, but still.
No, but advisory groups, and one after the other. This interesting one was the science envoy resignation.
Mr. Spock.
Daniel M. Kamen. Did you see that one?
I did see mention of it, but I don't know why it's important.
I do have it in the list I sent you, but I'm going to put it at the very bottom so you can find it easily, because this is more of a visual thing.
Okay.
Right? And so I'll just try to set the tone for you. Let's see. Here you are, and here is the link. So if you click that.
Twitter, all right.
Mr. President, I'm resigning as science envoy. Your response to Charlottesville enables racism, sexism, and harms our country and planet.
Yes.
Okay. So let me, I'm not going to read the entire letter, but let me read the first couple of words from each paragraph and concentrate on the first letter of each paragraph. Okay.
Okay.
1. I am resigning. My decision to resign. Particularly troubling to me. Examples of this destructive game. Acts and words matter. Character is vital in leadership. Herein, with regret, I resign.
Okay. I see now. Or I see. That's a good trick. I did that once. Not quite like this, but okase, so like an acrostic puzzle.
Well, listen, and so somebody pointed out on Twitter, finally, after all this time, all those Benghazi acrostics finally have a chance to come home to roost, because everybody who's writing the resignation letters is doing this now.
Wow. It's catching on.
Yeah.
That's nice. I like that.
It is a wonderful thing. So, but this one was particularly good. So anyway, that's an example of some of the stuff that Sarah was talking about. And now let's get to the specifics. Let's get to some polling data. Yesterday, Quinnipiac poll came out. President Trump gets a negative 35 to 59% overall. I mean, his job approval has been slowly dropping. President Trump is doing more to divide the country, 62% of voters say, while 31% say he's doing more to unite the country.
Okay,
voters
people.
disapproved 60 to 32 Trump's response to the events in Charlottesville. President Trump's decisions and behavior have encouraged white supremacist groups, 59% of voters say, and only 3% say he's discouraged the group. So his message is pretty clear there in regard to what he was saying. There's nothing to argue about. He's encouraging them. Now, whether you like that or don't like that is a different story, but there's no question about what he's doing. Now, here's an interesting one. There's too much prejudice in the nation today. 55% people say, while 40% say there's too much political correctness. Now, that question started being asked in June of 2016. It was the other way around. Now that Trump is president and people see what it means to not have political correctness, they say there's too much prejudice.
You people are never satisfied.
I know. So basically, he's overwhelmingly considered a divider.
Yes.
And voters disapproved 63 to 31% of the way Trump is handling race relations. The president doesn't care about issues facing minority groups, say 60 to 37. So again, it's pretty clear where he's at in those things. Different poll, Trump hits new polling low as base shrinks. The president's base of support is diminished, not increased, in the 7 months he's been in office. This is a Politico story, probably the Morning Consult poll here, which they do jointly. Slipping to the lowest points of his young presidency when we have to remember he's only 7 months in. While he's confounded the polls before, it's the trend lines that should be the most worrisome to the White House. And that confounding the polls before thing is something we'll get to, too. Only 40% of registered voters approve of the Trump job as doing as president, down from a high water mark of 52% in March. Remember, this was his most friendly poll of all of them, which happens when you do polling online. You often attract a more conservative group. And the percentage who approve strongly, one way to measure the size of Trump's most fervent supporters is at a new low, just 18%. Now, if you're looking at people who support you, but only 18% support you strongly, that's bad news.
Yeah. Pretty bad.
Among Republican voters in the new
sucks.
Political Morning Consult poll, the president's down at 76%, down from 79% last week. When you're below 80% in your own people, that's bad. So all of that has implications. Public policy is also out with some polling. Who do you trust more, CNN or Trump? CNN 50, Trump 35.
Oh, yes.
NBC 53-35, ABC 53-35, CBS 53-35. So the major networks, not MSNBC, but NBC, the major networks get approval from the public. Paul Ryan's job approval's at 16. McConnell's is at 9. And congressional approval is at 9%.
All right. We've been there before.
Impeaching Donald Trump, support 48, oppose 41.
That's pretty good.
Democrats have a 14-point lead on the generic congressional ballot. That would be enough to take the House.
Well.
We'll get to that. Not every poll shows that. And actually, why don't we do it now? Okay. There's a fellow named G. Elliott Morris, who's a political scientist who tracks this. And he basically aggregates all the different generics and says right now, on average, it's about a 7-point lead, and that would be enough for 12 seats swinging to the Democrats. Not enough to take the House, but a significant chunk. And the interesting there is a couple of weeks ago it was 3 seats. So as we get closer to the election, right now what we're seeing is that generic ballot for Democrats go up. And that's partly because Trump is starting to attack Republicans in the House and Senate for not bending to his will, which, by the way, they ain't going to do. And, of course, that just drives congressional approval down. Democrats, not surprisingly, don't like a Republican Congress. But if Trump starts to attack the Republican Congress, then you have Republicans not liking the Republican Congress, not helped, of course, by the inability for Republicans to pass anything on health care.
Right, or anything else for that matter.
Or anything else for that matter, because they, as we talked about for years on the show, they're not in the least bit interested in governance. They like to fight. They like to play power games. They're 9-year-olds. They wouldn't know how to govern the country if they were asked, and they have been asked and they don't know, and we're seeing it. So, people don't like how they're functioning. And the core support of Trump crazies is not the country as a whole.
Well, okay. Thank God for that.
Thank God for that. So all that matters. Other things, political polls 2020. Bernie Sanders beats Trump 51-38. Joe Biden beats Trump 51-39. These are kind of generic numbers. The generic Democrat with a name is running 10, 12, 13 points ahead of Trump, just like the generic Congress is. So that's interesting. Another thing that was really interesting about this particular PPP poll, by the margin of 58-26, voters favor relocating Confederate statues from government property to museums.
Okay. Yes. Good.
All right. So if you ask, do you want to take the Confederate statues down, you're going to get no. But if you say, well, let's relocate it to a place of respect like a museum, then you get yes. And to me, obviously, it says, okay, well, that's a nice solution. Do
Let's
that.
take the yes.
I think something like that happened in South Carolina when they took down the
With the
Confederate
flag.
flag at the State House.
Yes.
And they put it somewhere else. They didn't just burn it.
Right. And throw it in the trash.
Right, exactly. So fine.
Lots you
Now,
can do with it.
It's important, I think, as this goes forward, is that it's, of course, a fascinating and interesting and important discussion about the idea of what the Confederate statues represent. There's plenty of data, there's plenty of facts out there showing that they were basically put up during the Jim Crow era mostly, not so much to remember what happened to the Confederates, but to send a message to current, situations. And that's fine and that's true, but facts have little to do with it, and facts have little to do with how people vote and how people feel. We know that. And so putting those Confederate statues in context is all, important. And I love the idea of not even talking about taking them down, but talking about relocating them. It's a much smarter play. The fact of the matter is, Charlottesville wasn't about statues. It was about Nazis. And so if you have Nazis marching, and if you have Nazis, chanting, Jews will not replace us.
Yes, we have to go into our break, though. We'll be right back. I'm sorry about that, Greg. It's tough to get used to, isn't it? And welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. A little bit of an abrupt break on our first live show back from the vacation. Sorry about that. When we last left, we were speaking to our guest Greg Dworkin about Nazis. Tell us about Nazis, Greg.
Yeah, look, I have to point out for regular listeners of the show, I interrupt David all the time. Least he can do is interrupt me sometimes.
Right, every once in a while.
So that's fine.
We'll get those.
But the fact is that Charlottesville was about Nazis, and Charlottesville was about people chanting, Jews will not replace us. And so the statue question is of interest, and I think it's a long-term sensitive way to approach it would be to suggest moving it to museums rather than just taking them down. But the issue really needs to be about Nazis, and that's why the issue is on Trump, because he didn't have a full-throated denunciation of them. Back to PPP polling. 57% of GOP want Trump as the nominee again, and 29% don't. So that invites, even if he wins, a primary.
Yes.
And another thing from PPP polls, Trump voters think whites and Christians face the most discrimination of any groups in the U.S.
Trump voters would think that, yes.
Yeah, they do. As a matter of fact, Trump voters would, this is a troll question, but I love it, Trump voters would prefer Jeff Davis as president over Barack Obama 45-20.
And he's dead.
And he's dead.
Right.
But of course, Trump doesn't know that.
Yeah, probably not. He's a guy who's getting more and more recognized every day. Or something like that. What was it? Whatever the comment was about Frederick Douglass. He doesn't think anybody, it's very pleasant. In Trump's world, nobody dies. Yay.
Right. So we're going to switch gears a little bit here. Some interesting surveys have come out looking back at 2016. And 2016 is in the news right now for a couple of reasons, one of which Hillary Clinton's new book is coming out, and little segments have been posted, including that Trump stalking her on the stage when he was standing behind her and she was speaking during the debate.
Yeah.
Made her skin crawl.
Well, it should.
And then she was debating out loud whether she should have confronted him at the time. She decided not to, because that's her lifetime way of doing it. But because the book is out, people are talking about that a little bit. Plus, there's all these new surveys out. Brian Schaffner, who's a political scientist at the Cooperative Congressional Election Study and director of the UMass poll, posted the main release of the 2016 CCES, Cooperative Congressional Election Study, Common Content Data Set. And here's analysis of Bernie to Trump voters. which John Sides did, by the way.
To Trump?
Yeah.
Oh.
So 12% of voters who voted for Bernie in the primary wound up voting for Trump in the election.
Whoa. Okay.
What does that mean? Well, to put in context, it's not unusual for 10 to 12% of one person's group in a primary to vote for the other party in an election. So this is not remarkable. It feels remarkable because we know Bernie so well and we know the voters so well. And you scratch your head and say, how could you do this? But if you look at it in the context of, and maybe it's not as high as 12. Some surveys say it as low as 6. But my reading of this is, look at it this way. What if these were the old Reagan Democrats? And by old, I mean older than the Bernie to Clinton voters or the Bernie stay home voters or the Bernie to Jill Stein voters. Again, Bernie in the primary and then these other people in the general election. Mm-hmm. What you have is a bunch of conservative older voters who are never going to vote for Clinton because she's a girl. So they voted for Bernie. But then come election time, they voted for the Republican. That doesn't seem at all outlandish. It doesn't seem out of character. If you actually look at the political leanings of these voters, and I don't see an age breakdown, but if you look at the political leanings, they're definitely more conservative.
Yeah.
So these could be the old style, Florida Panhandle Democrats. Never changed their affiliation, so they get to vote in Democratic primaries. But they're still going to vote Republican in the general election. So it makes it look like Sanders voters in a fit of pique decided to vote for Trump. That's not really what's going on here.
Okay, well, that makes things a little clearer. I'm sure there are one or two who might have done that, but in the main... And of course,
the main group, so it's an interesting group of people and always interesting looking at them. Of course, the idea that people as a bloc have a clear, logical reason for voting this person versus the other person is never true.
Right.
It's all emotion.
Well, there's a lot of that going on. There's a lot of things that are just inexplicable. I mean, we have a lot of people in this country, and a vast number of them will be found if you can pin them down. Will say, I don't know what the hell I'm doing, basically.
Right. If you really want to go back and relook at 2016 again, and frankly, I don't, but if you wanted to, there is a group of pieces that have come out about this. I think the best one is by Mark Murray on NBC News, 12 Days That Stunned a Nation, How Hillary Clinton Lost, focusing a lot on Comey. And I think, the general message there is that the Clinton lead was real but not as solid as it appeared. And then Comey came out and then things happened. And I think it's a very good read and a good reminder that, focusing on, Trump beat the polls, therefore the polls now don't count. It's got to be one of the dumbest narratives possible because that's not really what happened.
Well, no surprise then that's the Trump narrative. That's the one he wanted. And like everything else, don't believe what you read in the newspaper because fake news. Don't believe what you see in the polls because they were once wrong.
Yeah, exactly. So that Black Swan event really should not be directing everything that happens. I've seen people do it. Probably the best reasoned example of that recently was Steve Kornacki, who put together that kind of thesis and has been pushing that a little bit. It still doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The fact of the matter is when you look at the polls and you dissect them the way we've been doing, the Trump base is shrinking and he would be in serious jeopardy of re-election if the election were held today, depending upon who he ran against, of course. And the fact of the matter is that he's doing incredibly poorly. As Sarah Kendzior pointed out, he's losing people in his administration. He's losing people who started to work with him. The thing I don't want to leave out, of course, is the Mar-a-Lago exodus. In addition to everything else that we talked about, there's 17 charities that have refused to have their events at Mar-a-Lago, which is something that hurts him directly and something that he pays attention to. It may not be the worst hurt in the world, but he feels it. Yeah. Because it's a snub and it's money.
Right. The snub is probably bigger even than the money.
Hard
he's
to
making,
tell,
he's making
money.
plenty. at the DC hotel. I don't know if it makes up for everything. These are expensive galas, but yeah, these are his people. The Palm Beach social season crowd. That does hurt. And
they're sticking their finger in his eye, and at the same time, Bobby Three Sticks is closing in. Lots of stories while you were away about Manafort and how his money laundering issues might be coming to the fore. Speculation about whether or not he's flipping, but the idea being that the people that Robert Mueller have put together are well positioned to look at the same kind of money laundering in the Trump empire entirely. And much of his back and forth between the good Trump and the bad Trump, the Phoenix Trump and the American Legion scripted Trump, may well have to do, as people who know him claim when they're interviewed, that he's feeling trapped in the White House, that he feels like everything is closing in on him and that there's no escape and that there's 24/7 responsibilities and it's hard being president and there's nowhere to go. And of course, other presidents have felt the same thing, but they've handled it like adults, and he's a 9-year-old. So that's my theme for this morning.
There's nowhere to go. The guy who bankrupted the Secret Service already has nowhere to go.
Exactly right.
Okay.
So I'm going to leave you with that. I don't want to overload you with 50,000 articles, even though I have them. I thought we would just concentrate on those.
I will take 10.
And welcome you back to a live performance from Kagro in the Morning. David Waldman, this is Greg Dworkin speaking to him in the morning early, as we often do. Thank you so much for listening, folks. And David will be back tomorrow, and I'll be back Monday.
Yes. All right. Thanks very much. Sorry about that break. I was thinking about it like 5 minutes after the last break, just like rolling that music in the middle of whatever you're saying, just to see if I could freak you out a little bit. But I don't know. I got all professional or something, and I figured I'd say
it's time to randomly interrupt you.
Pretty much. Maybe I can invite Armando on, and if things begin
to interrupt each other. It'd be just like old times.
If this has been going on for quite a while, hey, it's time for a break. Now that I've blown it won't work. Okay.
David Waldman calls cloture on Armando. So take care, and we'll talk.
Do the same. All right. Well, thanks for hanging in there through that long break and bringing us back up to date. Appreciate it, Greg. We'll talk to you again on Monday. I have a feeling that there's something Armando needs to get off his chest as well over the long break. And you're certainly welcome to join in with us, Armando, if that's of interest to you. Or did you just want to stay in the background and take pot shots? So far, Greg, you weren't wrong. He was very impressed with your having criticized Kornacki, I think. He said, and actually put it like, thank God he actually did that. I was about to jump through Skype, which you're always welcome to do. I keep reiterating that. But anyway, and if things get out of hand, I always have music that I can use to interrupt you with. All right, so let's see. Where were we? How come I always want to put an extra D in Sarah Kendzior's name also? It feels like it should be Kenzidor. And I think every time I read it, I do that. Or maybe I transpose that D. Does that happen to anybody else? Very odd phenomenon. I'm not really sure why that would happen. Anyway, let's see. Before we dive back into Pocket and pick up on the rest of the stories over the last couple days, some things from this morning, Eamon Javers, who is a Washington correspondent for CNBC, I saw had a very interesting tweet noting with a photo illustrating the point, no Marine at the West Wing door this morning, implying POTUS is still in the residence as he tweets this morning. Interesting observation. I think we probably all thought that might be the case, although I thought it might be the case all the time, and maybe it is, but no one has thought to illustrate or punctuate the point by taking a picture of the front door of the West Wing. And I guess you got to be something of an insider to be able to read all the signals about what that means. But yes, we're used to seeing a Marine guard posted there at the West Wing entrance because we're used to having a president who reports to work in the morning. But Lazy Bones Oaf is still rolling around in his slippers upstairs, anger tweeting from the toilet, no doubt. And I'm glad that Eamon Javers brought that to our attention. That stupid Cheeto-looking bastard. Get out of bed. Or, you know what, stay where you are. Go golfing. What do I care? Is his 17-day vacation over? I assume so. I didn't count the 17 days. And I ate up a good chunk of those 17 by rolling out on vacation myself. And by the way, it was very nice. Were you interested in my catching you up on what we did on our vacation? It was a fun time in the southeast. We actually went through the western part of the southeastern seaboard states where we haven't been nearly as much as we've been on the coast. So last year we went up north and we went all the way to Niagara Falls, and this year not all the way south, but we made it down to Georgia, where we ran into the devil who was looking for a soul to steal. However, we were in a bind and way behind, and we had to move on. Could make no deal. We have to make great deals. I know that's true, but I had to move on. But nice stop. By the way, highly recommended. Of course, many of you are probably familiar, Asheville, Virginia, as a tourist stop. We went through a little corner of Tennessee on our way down there. Asheville, North Carolina. Did I say Asheville, Virginia? I don't know why. But also, I guess it was northwestern Georgia, north central Georgia. I don't know. When we were all over the place, and we made some nice stops in some of the national forests there. They have some great places to jump in the water there, a sliding rock, and some waterfalls to swim under. And Blue Ridge, Georgia, we spent the night around there, and that was really surprisingly, well, of course, very scenic, but really great. We took the kids to a nice restaurant there. We just wanted to take them out to get something to eat, hot dogs, hamburgers, or whatever. Everything was closed. We got there late. They close early, to be sure. And then I think we found one other restaurant that we thought would be suitable for them, just a pub kind of a place where they could get burgers or something. It was closed for renovation that very day that we got there. And we ended up at the one restaurant that was still open, which I can't recall the name of, Harvest something or other. I should look it up and give them a plug because they were fantastic. I walked by them 5 times because they were fancy. It was a fancy pants restaurant. And we didn't think the kids were going to go for that. But eventually they got so hungry, they just said, all right, we'll take what we can get. And, it's a funny way of speaking of a fancy restaurant. It's delicious. You should all go there. It's beautiful. It's fantastic. And there's some people who have some outrageous vacation homes in the area. So, anyway, thumbs up for that region. We were there so that the next morning we could take the kids to Tanktown, USA. How about that? Our older boy, who's been delaying the process for some time, he finally got his learner's permit to drive, and I was a little bit confused by that. Just normally you see kids want their licenses or their permits immediately as soon as they're eligible for it, and his approach has been, you drive me around all over the place. Why would I not want to have a chauffeur car service? It's like Uber, but for free and for me. And I don't want to learn to drive. And I kind of think he does, but he was not in any rush. But we finally pushed him to get his permit, and we didn't tell him why. You got to have your permit before we go on this trip. And, he's too inquisitive to just leave it at that. So we just said, well, suffice to say, you're going to need your learner's permit to do an activity that you're going to want to do. You're not going to be able to guess what it is. So I'm not worried about that. And of course, then he spent the next couple of days trying to guess what it is. Is it go-karts? Is it off-roading? Are we going to drive a truck off-road? Are we going to take ATVs off-road? Something like that. No, you're not going to guess this. And indeed, he did not. By the way, the fantastic restaurant that we ate in, and in Blue Ridge, was called Harvest on Main. And guess what? It's probably on Main Street. Yes, it is, in Blue Ridge, Georgia. So, recommended. Delicious. Fantastic food. If you're ever in Blue Ridge, Georgia, or if you're ever looking for a reason to put yourself in that region of Georgia, I would recommend it to you. And it really is a nice place to be. We had a great time. Tanktown was fun. In fact, the fact checkers are calling in. We were in fact driving armored personnel carriers and not tanks. And Gideon could call in and discuss this thing because they were British-made armored personnel carriers, about 1960s vintage, we were told. And I don't really know what the make and model was, but they drive pretty much like tanks. So no big gun on them, but armored personnel carriers with the big tracks and everything. And it was fun. And we crushed cars. That's the cool thing. So we drove it around in a big mud pit, and we crushed cars. And this was the first thing that my son drove since getting his permit. I guess he has driven go-karts in the past at amusement parks and things like that. I left that out. But basically, the first motorized vehicle he drove once he had his permit was this armored personnel carrier. So we taught him to parallel park in it by crushing the other vehicle. And he had a great time. So we have a nice video of it and everything. And he couldn't ask for more. So I recommend that as well, going and crushing cars. We passed on the machine gun shoot that was offered. It's one of the services they've got. And we just decided, I think that sounds maybe a little not like something we should be doing. And it put me in mind of the kids that they give Uzis to before they're old enough and they have horrible accidents with them. And I just figured it's enough to crush cars, I think. All right. Let's see. So we'll catch up on our comments as well. Gideon also commenting. It's true. The polls were wrong. We were talking about the polling and the outcome with Greg. And it's true. The polls were wrong, but again, even at the time, I think one of the things that's important to discuss is, for one thing, there's error built right into the polls, and they tell you right up front what their methodology is and how much error there is built into it. And remember that all they're stating here is that within a certain range of percentage points, they are 99% confident that they have got the correct numbers in there somewhere in the range, plus or minus, in some cases 3, 4, 5%. And then, of course, there's just flat out wrongness. But again, even so, all they're telling you is we can be 99% sure. And we think if you describe this as a black swan event, and I'm not even sure I understand that terminology perfectly, but there's still that 1% hanging out there. We're 99% sure we've captured it within the margin of error. But if we missed by another point or two past the margin of error, there's your 1%. These things do happen. Part of the reason, Gideon adds here, part of the reason Clinton lost was the polls being inaccurate. And in some sense, that's, I don't know if I would put that down as part of the reason she lost. Yeah, Black Swan, just an exceptional event. True. And I think that's, I don't think I have all the nuance of it, necessarily that, I think there's a lot. That's the basic explanation of it, though, certainly. Black Swan event. But, I don't know if I would be able to say that. Can I agree with that? Part of the reason Clinton lost was the polls being inaccurate. I mean, the polls having missed certainly reflected the unexpected loss. But are we trying to say here that do people not say vote because they were so confident that everything was going to go fine because of what the polls did, or that maybe there were some protest votes cast based on the alleged certainty of the polls? That I can buy into, and that seems to be a clear implication of some of the latest polling on, say, what people who may have voted for Sanders in the primary did with their general election votes. Yeah, I mean, and you point here, one more comment from Gideon, who points out even Silver was predicting a win. Everybody was predicting a win, yes, but even Silver, would be the first one to tell you that he was predicting a win within a certain range of confidence. I am X% sure that she will win. I don't think, I guess if you can find any point at which Nate Silver says, I am 100% predicting a Clinton win, then I missed something. But even right up until the end, it was always expressed as a function of the percentage chance that he was right. All right. Well, let's see. I'm going to move on to some of the issues we have pocketed away, and it's hard to tell where should I start with all of this. Right up with the latest that I put in there, or are there some things I need to pull out from earlier? I'm going to bring this one up. I saw this one tweeted earlier this morning and treated by the folks at Share Blue, but I went back to the original source on this one, The Guardian, just for a little more in-depth information about this one. Oh, you're gonna show me the picture? Show me the article. Thank you very much. The Guardian writing about Charlottesville. The United Nations warning the U.S. over alarming racism. The UN now at this point stepping in and saying things are getting so bad in the United States that we're going to issue you the kind of early warning of racial violence and strife in your country that we typically see issued with respect to developing nations, shall we say. Haroon Sadiq and Oliver Laughlin are the writers for The Guardian on this one. Your bulleted subheaders here say, U.S. urged to unequivocally and unconditionally reject discrimination. Trump remarks, scary and disturbing, according to former spy chief James Clapper, who is under some criticism this morning from Trump. Fair point. He's been a bit of a liar before, James Clapper has, and so that makes things a little difficult to sort out. But I'm pretty sure he's mostly right about Donald Trump, and that Donald Trump is 10 times worse. I'm going to make that assumption. A UN committee charged with tackling racism has issued an early warning over conditions in the U.S. and urged the Trump administration to unequivocally and unconditionally reject discrimination. The warning specifically refers to events last week in Charlottesville, Virginia, where the civil rights activist Heather Heyer was killed when a car rammed into a group of people protesting against a white nationalist rally. Such statements are usually issued by the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, or CERD, over fears of ethnic or religious conflict. In the past decade, the only other countries issued with early warnings have been, good company, Burundi, Iraq, Ivory Coast, Kyrgyzstan, and Nigeria. Oh, and the United States of America. Thank you very much, Donald Trump. The United States has been warned under the procedure in the past when CERD, I don't know if they actually pronounce it CERD, but CERD, raised the issue of land rights conflicts with the Western Shoshone indigenous peoples in 2006. And that one doesn't ring a bell with me, and it's no surprise because I'm such a white Eastern person, I guess. But I'd be curious to. I've opened up that link. That's something I want to research on my own time, off the air. But I'm sure that that's a lot more familiar, and maybe a lot more familiar to a lot of you. Maybe more Western people are more in tune with that one as well. Anyway, the article continues here. We are alarmed by the racist demonstrations, aren't we all? With overtly racist slogans, chants, and salutes by white nationalists, neo-Nazis, and the Ku Klux Klan, promoting white supremacy and inciting racial discrimination and hatred, said Anastasia Crickley, chair of the committee. Donald Trump faced widespread criticism after he blamed both sides for the violence in Charlottesville. Although the CERD statement did not refer to him by name, it called on the government of the United States of America, and he's in it, as well as high-level politicians and public officials, and he's one of those, to unequivocally and unconditionally reject and condemn racist hate speech and crimes in Charlottesville and throughout the country. And he hasn't done that, and he's never going to. Crickley also urges U.S. authorities to address the root causes of the proliferation of such racist manifestations, and they're certainly not going to do that because that's what sustains him day to day in his office. Anyway, that whole thing, by the way, I meant to bring this up, but I never get a chance. When Greg was discussing the white supremacist and neo-Nazis marching in Charlottesville with that Jews will not replace us chant, what a horrible unforced error from their perspective. I don't think that was I don't think it was their intent to chant that. It was their intent. They meant that. That's true. But as it appeared to me that they were there and that the chant that the leaders meant to lead people in was a more generalized, not simply anti-Semitic, but more, they wanted to spread the hatred out a little wider. And it was at the initial stages, you will not replace us. Like you immigrants, you Jews, you people of color, whatever you are, and including in that you liberal, progressive types who are willing to tolerate the immigration and the changing demographics here in the United States. That's too much for us to bear, but you and the people you allow into the country will not replace us. And I think that they almost thought they were being in tongue-in-cheek in a way, in slipping over into Jew, like you and Jew, and then Jews will not replace us. But it gained currency very quickly with them because they're anti-Semitic as well as everything else, and neo-Nazis at that. So it wasn't difficult to slip into it. And then it ended up becoming the narrative, the story, that they were in fact there chanting Jews will not replace us. Because they did do that. I mean, they didn't have to stretch. That's not inaccurate reporting. It's just something that I think that they didn't intend to do, and then they slipped into. And like I said, it's a huge unforced error. It put them in the worst possible light. And that's saying a lot, because they were there to put themselves in terrible, terrible light, and they did it, and they made things even worse for themselves. Okay, well, because I control things here on this end, I'm able to play the music in advance and let myself know that a break is coming up. We'll be right back after this. And welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I just let that music roll all the way through the break, thinking we might get some kind of cool, interesting new part of the music. It's a little bit different this time, but not that much different. That's good. Good, consistent music can take you through the break, make things that much easier. And let's see, we're into the 10 o'clock hour here on the show, and it's time for us to move on to a couple other items that I have waiting in the wings. Let's see, have I caught up with all of the other various comments? I think so. What about our Twitter comment channel? Let's see. Oh, okay, there's some extra. Let's see. Michael Musson. Hi, Michael. How you been? Turkey gets food and care every day. Decides the future is bright, then Thanksgiving comes around. Black Swan. Okay, that's true. I can relate. And Karen, what do you have to say? Why do you think the Charlottesville replace chant was unintentional? I got nothing other than the fact that it changed. And they could very easily have started with Jews will not replace us, but that doesn't really make a great deal. Well, none of it makes any sense, obviously, as a chant. But the you will not replace us as a more generalized chant seemed to encapsulate I was going to say the actual grievances, but they don't even really have real grievances. But certainly the perceived grievances of this group, I think, was better encapsulated in you will not replace us. And then I think that some people thought it would be funny, and a good portion of the turnout for the Unite the Right rally, as they were calling it, really was online doofuses who have been, I'll say semi-radicalized in the sense that they've been sucked into this stupid world, some of which I described for you in the pre-recorded shows of the last couple days, by being drawn in through the various Reddit subreddits and the men's rights movement online and Gamergate and various other things. And I don't know if I have this story at the ready, but it reminds me of the story of at least one of these doofus kids, and some of them really are just doofus kids, that found themselves at this rally, uniformed and everything, in one of the European identity or whatever the group was, that had the white polo shirts with a little logo, and he was all dressed up. He had all the stupid riot gear on, the makeshift riot gear, the helmet and the shin guards and all that stuff. And, but he was I guess he got separated from his group, and he was under threat from some counter protesters who were actually fighting with these guys. And, it looked for all the world, as I recall, the report, said it looked like he was going to get battered with a flagpole, or maybe even just skewered with a flagpole, and he throws his hands up in the air and tears off the helmet, and he strips the shirt off, and he basically just says, look, I was here for the lulz. Remember that when we learned about that all the way back during the initial consideration of some of the origin stories of what became the so-called alt-right, and we realized that a lot of them were just sort of moving over from 4chan, and they were teenage and early 20s kids who really just liked getting a rise out of people. And they're not all like that. There are some serious and dedicated neo-Nazis in that group, and they're leading it. And they're leading it knowing that a certain percentage of their group are soft Nazis, I guess you might call them, that there's no real chance that they would stick with the program when the going got rough, if you make the going rough enough, which again is part of the reason why I'm still not entirely convinced that not punching Nazis is the thing to do. But I think that they meant a very different thing. I mean, it ultimately means the same thing. When they say you will not replace us, they certainly meant Jews among them. But I don't think what they were mostly there to do. Certainly the Nazis would have been, the ones who were committed Nazis, like I actually endorse Adolf Hitler's National Socialist Party platform Nazis, then yes, Jews are the top worry, the top concern for them. But I don't even think Nazis were worried, real live 1940s Nazis, were they ever worried that Jews would replace them? I don't really think that was, the Jews will not have an equal place in our society or be allowed to live because they're horrible people and subhuman, as they like to put it. But they never, I don't recall that there was any basis for saying that they won't replace them. I mean, that would certainly be one of the things that they would claim to be true, but it wouldn't be their chant ordinarily. Also, of course, this was also a broader coalition of idiots that include not specifically Nazis, but people who have all sorts, clearly are going to be sympathetic to their anti-Semitism. But I'm here primarily to kick black people out of the country, not Jewish people out of the country. And so a Unite the Right rally would in all likelihood be about you people, whoever you people are, not replacing us. And, if they were being serious about it and really, playing serious coalition politics for real, a Jews will not replace us chant would probably give rise to some discussion among the leadership there and say, you're really narrowing the agenda here and you're writing us out of the coalition. We're not here primarily as anti-Semites. We are here primarily as racial bigots. And we have a fair number among our membership who, for whatever reason, believe Jews to be white. And you're really upsetting our apple cart here. We're going to have to stop and have a new leadership election before we go on with this march. Obviously, that's not going to happen. And it was a lot easier to lead people into the Jews will not replace us, but chant just for the lulz. But I don't think that there were enough people there who really felt that the primary threat to their identity was being replaced by Jews. So, it's just a guess, but it was just too easy to mislead them, or lead them along, almost accidentally into declaring themselves Nazis and pretty much putting themselves outside of anybody's acceptable range of comfort by falling over into Jews will not replace. They may fully have believed it or endorsed it, but my guess is that just wasn't what they were there to protest. Though they were happy to join in because, like I said, the lulz. Let's see. Brian Monroe, our Canadian pundit, says, just a comment from this week associated with your comments on the alt-right. Based on your show today, an older comment, I guess, from one of the previous days. I believe what unites the alt-right isn't the color of their skin, it's the thinness of it. Yes. Well, that's certainly true. And the vast majority of what constitutes the alt-right are people with the grievance of having had somebody say they don't like them for whatever reason. And no, I don't think the chant, Gideon says, no, the chant about Jews was not a joke. It's not a joke. That's not the same thing. That's not what I'm saying it was. It should be taken seriously. They don't want Jews to replace them, but I don't think that was the initial chant. I mean, the record is pretty clear that the chant begins, if you watch enough of the videotape, you will not replace us. And somebody who thought it would be even more provocative, whether they thought it would be funny to them, provocative, or just plain old, we're going to make the news now if we switch over to Jews will not replace us. They won't be able to resist that. It may very well have been intentional, and it may have been 100% true that they actually are that anti-Semitic, and maybe all of them are. But it leaves me at a loss to explain how the chant started, you will not replace us, and then became Jews will not replace us. It's good copy. You got them dead to rights. They were saying Jews will not replace us. And surely there is someone there who will say, yes, we started chanting Jews will not replace us. The neo-Nazis, the actual committed Nazi contingent would say that. They'd be happy to say that. But I don't know if that makes it true. Nor do I really think it's true that the vast majority of them began chanting Jews will not replace us and would testify, if they were compelled somehow to testify truthfully, that that's how they started and that's what they meant, but they were happy enough to fall into it. It's not a joke because they were willing to do it, but there's a very significant contingent among what makes the alt-right who are followers 100%. And people who were there because they're there to get a rise out of other people. And they figured very quickly, once they heard someone else say either what sounded like Jew or Jews, or they realized, oh, it dawns on me now that sounds a lot like Jew. Maybe we can just move over into that. That'll get an even bigger rise out of people. They're hateful people. They're despicable. They're scumbags. They need punching. They're just as bad as the rest of them. But I don't think that this is true. I just don't think that started out that way. Although, let's see, Mimi Joe says, please go back and listen to yourself on this chant defense nonsense. Doesn't matter how it started, and don't believe the LOL guy. I don't care whether anybody believes the LOL guy. He did the thing he did. That may have been self-preservation. But, I guess I'll go back and listen to it, because why not? But I'm pretty firm in my stance on this one. I heard the chants change. They did do that. Why did they do that? My guess is this. Your guess is that. It doesn't mean I don't think they're anti-Semitic. It doesn't mean I don't think they're Nazis. It doesn't mean I don't think they need punching if possible. It doesn't mean that I think it's any less serious, that they wouldn't be anti-Semitic if they were not in that environment, but they're going to be anti-Semites wherever they go. But the chant changed. The chant changed. And if anybody else has a better explanation as to why the chant didn't just start with Jews will not replace us, then I'd be willing to listen to it. But if the question is, why did it start with you and turn into Jews? The answer is because they didn't have their heads together and decide that they were going to be there protesting Jews in particular. They were brought together to protest everything and everybody that they don't like. And it was easy to fall into Jews will not replace us once somebody thought, hey, we could probably get everybody to chant that instead. It wasn't that they didn't believe it. It wasn't that they couldn't have come up with the idea earlier. They just didn't. And I wondered why. So I'm pretty sure I will stick with that one. And there's certainly I don't know. You want me to reevaluate it, I'll reevaluate it. But I don't feel like I'm going to come at it that openly. I think I heard what I heard, and that's it. And I think it's probably one of the least important points of the entire thing. They were all perfectly happy to chant that. It was disastrous for them, and thank God for it. I hope they do it again. And I hope they mean it when they do. It doesn't make any difference to me. Except that it'll maybe make me feel a little bit better if people punch them, if I really feel like they're committed Nazis as well. But even if they're just goofy, I'm kidding around, I want to annoy people, Nazis, punch them too. Maybe punch them worse. Punch them harder. Teach them a lesson. If they want to surrender on the street on camera, that's fine. I don't care. All right. Speaking, though, of Charlottesville, I did pick up this other story here from Politico yesterday and tweeted it around. This is, I think, something, we all ought to be aware of. And it gives you pause a little bit in terms of trying to decide how and when and why and in what way to do the right thing. But I think ultimately you end up coming back to the same conclusion. Gotta do this one. This is a piece by Brennan Gilmore, who writes, How I Became Fake News. I witnessed a terrorist attack in Charlottesville. Then the conspiracy theories began. Check this story out. Last Sunday evening, I received a worried call from my sister asking if I had spoken with my mother and father. I had spent the day doing interviews about the vehicle attack I witnessed the day before while protesting the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville and had not been in front of a computer all day. She told me that my parents' home address had been posted on a neo-Nazi conspiracy theorist message board. They are suggesting that you arranged the attack, Brennan. She said, there are death threats against you. On Saturday morning, I witnessed James Fields smash his car into a crowd of demonstrators, killing Heather Heyer and wounding 19 others. Though I immediately shared the footage with police on the scene, it took me a half hour to decide to post it publicly. I was concerned about how the footage might be used by the, quote, alt-right, and felt uncomfortable knowing that I had probably filmed someone's death. I did not want the attention posting the video was likely to bring. I consulted with my friends and family, some of whom were also at the counter-protest, and some of whom were watching the coverage from outside Charlottesville. They all urged me to share the video, and when I heard from friends that some media outlets were suggesting that it might have been an accident, or that the driver might have been attempting to escape an angry mob, I knew I had to post it. The video I took and the scene I witnessed with my own two eyes clearly showed the attack was intentional. Fields drove down 2 empty blocks and plowed straight into the crowd before fleeing in reverse. So I tweeted it out, and the tweet is embedded here along with the video, which you have no doubt seen. Within the next 24 hours, nearly every major American news network and a variety of international press outlets asked to interview me about the attack. I was too shaken to sleep on Saturday night, but I spent all day Sunday conducting interviews. I tried to give a frank account of what I had seen on 4th Street and respond clearly to questions about the situation more broadly. I said there was one side and one side alone responsible for the death I witnessed, the Nazis and white supremacists who brought their ideology of violence and hate to our town. It was their man who drove his vehicle into the crowd. I thought these points were straightforward and uncontroversial. Boy, was I wrong. Well, we live in the age of conspiracy theory, and that's the stock in trade for these guys. So guess what happened? Hours after an interview I did with Alex Witt of MSNBC, neo-Nazi commentators started posting about me on 4chan, Reddit, and YouTube. These crack researchers bragged that they had discovered I worked for the State Department. He points out, it's in my Twitter bio, that I have a connection to George Soros. He very publicly donated to the campaign of my former boss, Tom Pariello, and that I spent time in Africa working in conflict areas. Is that bad? That's what they say. P.S. Information available in major news outlets if you look up his name. Desperate to lay blame on anyone besides the alt-right, they seized on these facts to suggest a counter-narrative to the attack, claiming there was no way that someone with my background just happened to be right there taking the video. Even ignoring the fact that someone with my background, raised in Virginia, UVA graduate, lives in Charlottesville, worked to resolve ethnic conflicts overseas, politically progressive, is exactly the kind of person you'd expect to find at a protest against Nazis. Their theories were, even beyond that, absurd and illogical. They wrote that I was a CIA operative, funded by, choose your own adventure here, George Soros, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, the IMF/World Bank, and or a global Jewish mafia to orchestrate the Charlottesville attack in order to turn the general public against the alt-right. I had staged the attack and then worked with MSNBC and other outlets controlled by the left to spread propaganda. They claimed my ultimate goal was to start a race war that would undermine and then overthrow Donald Trump on behalf of the, quote, deep state. Says I'm generalizing here as the theories are widely variant and logically inconsistent, and I'm only aware of a small percentage that I could be bothered to read. But you would get the point pretty quickly, I think. Of course, lots of projection involved in that. His ultimate goal is to start a race war. But isn't that your ultimate goal? So what's the problem? Oh, I see. His ultimate goal is to start a race war that would end with the overthrow of Donald Trump by the deep state. Your ultimate goal is to start a race war that would overthrow the deep state on behalf of Donald Trump. So, okay. But it all starts with a race war. Can't we all come together and support race war? I mean, really, let's unite. As these theories spread, I started receiving hate mail. Some people sent me fairly tame comments on social media, like, God has a special place for you, Gilmore. You are a lying, lazy communist. Oh, I put the lazy in there. It's just lying communist. They're not crazy. You are a lying, oh, I'm sorry, it is crazy, because it says you are a lying communist Nazi. So, that's odd. I mean, lazy communist, you can envision. I mean, you're not supposed to be if you're a dedicated communist, but it can happen. Now, a lying communist Nazi, I suppose that's harder to find. Communists and Nazis typically, well, historically they didn't get along very well. But I guess a lying communist Nazi, like I'm lying about being communist, I'm actually a Nazi at heart, that could happen. Also he got some that just said, F you, cuck. That's a lot less complicated. Others threatened to kill me. One commenter posted that he'd like to torture me to see the extent of my CIA training. I was followed and accosted on the street in Charlottesville, and there have been many attempts to hack into my online accounts. One site posted all of my known addresses and family members, including the house I grew up in, where my parents still live. That's one of the dangers of living life online. Even if you don't consider yourself to be living your life online, stock and trade online is finding information, and lots more information than you probably think or would be comfortable with exists on you out there online, easy enough to find. The part that worries me the most, I guess, is followed on the street in Charlottesville. Not so much because I think that that's new and that they wouldn't follow you on the street wherever you live, but it worries me that that means that there's still enough of them in Charlottesville as opposed to having gone home that it could become an issue. Our hope that they were all foreign invaders from outside Charlottesville isn't likely to ring entirely true. Anyway, the story continues. Normally, I would have just ignored these threats and certainly would not have commented on them publicly. I consider it an honor to be attacked by people who have none. That is honor. An honor to be attacked by people who have none. And I am willing to put up with personal risk to speak out about Nazis. I believe that it is incumbent on white people in particular, he says, to take the risks necessary to confront and constrain white supremacists, given the inherent and intentional risk they present to all communities of color. My parents feel similarly and took having their address posted online by hate groups in stride. Within days, a letter showed up in their mail containing 4 pages of text explaining why I would burn in hell, as well as a suspicious white powder. The white powder was a hoax. Their local police department took all the threats seriously nonetheless, confiscated the letter, and stepped up patrols around the house. My parents' sole precaution was to pick the remaining tomatoes from their garden, quote, so the Nazis wouldn't get them. Even in the South, there must be a limit to our hospitality. Very interesting. However, these are not normal times, and a couple of things made me feel the need to speak out about these conspiracy theories and threats. First, at some point during the week, it occurred to me that there was a pretty good chance these conspiracy theories had made their way to the White House. Now we're talking about something fairly serious here. The threats, they're serious. Take them seriously. Don't ignore. Report. All of that was done, correctly by my estimation. I don't know. But it sounds like standard procedure. But this is a really interesting point here. these conspiracy theories, we've seen it before, the weirdo conspiracy theories that make their way to the White House and get validated by being reissued by the president of the United States, or the guy who claims to be president of the United States. That's one of the really serious dangers of having this wacko occupy this office. While the conspiracy theories initially appeared only on obscure wacko sites with pictures of bald eagles shooting machine guns, within 72 hours they had gone, quote, mainstream. InfoWars, which isn't really mainstream, but you get the idea. InfoWars posted a bombshell investigation into Charlottesville that showed it was all a Soros plot, and I was the key operative. The President of the United States has been a guest on the very show that echoed theories suggesting that I was, at best, an accessory to murder, and at worst, the orchestrator of the entire event, including hiring Nazi and Antifa actors, staging a confrontation, and then working with allies in the mainstream, quote, leftist media to blind the world to the, quote, reality. While some people in Facebook messages, tweets, and comment boards were calling for my head, others were tweeting at various conservative leaders, including Jeff Sessions, Donald Trump, and Sean Hannity, to open up an investigation into my alleged role in the attack. And I would not be surprised if we begin seeing investigations like this open, not necessarily focusing on this guy, before, well, you know what? Once Congress is back in town, you'll see press conferences calling for just that. In fact, you don't even have to wait that long. We'll just continue with the story. You'll see what we mean. On Thursday, Hannity broadcast claims on his radio show, I guess that's last Thursday, that the protesters in Charlottesville were paid. Same old, right? Although I wasn't mentioned by name, there's a clear connection between the conspiracy theories circulating about me orchestrating the attack and this segment, which aired on a show listened to by millions. Several days later, Texas Representative Louis Gohmert, clearly the dumbest guy in Congress, but still, a sitting U.S. congressman, called for a federal investigation of Charlottesville, alleging that protests were paid for and arranged, quote, by forces of evil beyond what normal people can think about, which is why it was left to Texas Representative Louis Gohmert to do the thinking about it, obviously. All of this done as part of a Democratic agenda to make the 2018 midterm elections about race. You're doing fine on your own about that, but okay. They want to deflect and project. Within less than a week, the conspiracy theory then had gone from alt-right message board to millions across the country on broadcast television and radio, and was being parroted now by a national politician. Trump has parroted InfoWars several times, something even InfoWars founder Alex Jones has described as surreal. Hannity dined with Trump a few weeks ago. Did I actually have to worry that the President of the United States might launch an investigation against me, little guy, little old me, because I happened to capture footage of a white supremacist terror attack and spoke publicly about what I saw? I realized I couldn't rule it out. And that, frankly, scares the hell out of me, for my family, but particularly for our country. Over the past week, I've seen personally the very real damage that these conspiracy theories have on our public discourse. The danger is not necessarily that a large number of people will believe them in their entirety. Instead, it's that they muddy the waters on issues that should be about right and wrong. This is truly dangerous. If we are to get beyond this current acute manifestation of the cancer of American racism and begin to heal, the right must join with the left to excise the malignancy of white supremacy from our politics and society. Conspiratorial thinking and confusion on what is real make this much harder. When he heard about the nature of the threats I had received, one law enforcement officer said, well, there are two sides to every story. Coming from rural Virginia, where Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson are buried and where Trump received a healthy majority of the vote, perhaps I should not have been taken aback, but I admit that I was, and that must have been awfully scary. We're coming up now to our last break of the day. We're going to take our quickie one here for the bottom of the hour and be right back with more Kagro in the Morning after this. And we are back with more Kagro in the Morning on Netroots Radio. Thanks for waiting with us through the break. A little more funky music. Or shall we phase it out in favor of still more news about Charlottesville fallout? Should we talk about the fallout of Bannon's so-called exit from the White House? Too many things to get to here. Let's see if we can take a little sampler. I'm going to break off from how I became fake news, because I think the nugget for which I had hoped to mine has been mined. Ooh, by the way, another of the fun things I did in northwestern Georgia, gold mining. The kids were thrilled. My kids love, for some reason, the idea of being able to extract riches from the earth. I hope that doesn't make them into evil people as they grow up. I will try and teach them to do this stuff responsibly and not to simply dig up every stream that they find, but they did a little gold panning, and they did very well, by the way. And they actually came out with a couple of nice looking flakes and nuggets, and it's fun, and we'll go find out how much that's worth. They're just impressed with themselves that they could go out and dig in the dirt and come away with something that someone else alleges is worth lots of money. I hope that they're not actually going to sell the stuff, because it makes for a nice souvenir. And I wouldn't really want to give that up to one of those we buy gold places and just be left with cash that they're going to fritter away on something else. But I guess that's the only point of mining for gold, really. But anyway, well, if we don't convert it into cash, maybe they won't become rapacious capitalists later in life. Just a little bit of capitalism would be fine. But okay, let's take the rest of our sample of the rest of the stories here and see if we can mine them for the relevant nuggets and move on from one to the next here. Let's see. First of all, I wanted to pick up on this one, not for any particular reason as this one first, but Business Insider's very interesting headline here. Trump told a GOP senator she could only ride on Air Force One if she voted for the health care bill. Can you believe this story? I mean, you probably can. It's Shelley Moore Capito from West Virginia that we're talking about. And I guess she wanted to go along with him for, and she's probably glad she didn't in the end, wanted to go along with him to the Boy Scout Jamboree speech, that disastrous one where he told his my friend's orgy story, but I won't tell you about that because you're just a bunch of Boy Scout kids. That horrible speech. Apparently, she wanted to go and she wanted to fly on Air Force One to it, and it's a big deal. You'd think senators and congressmen would get over this after a certain point, but it's always cool to fly on Air Force One. Maybe you still get those special presidential seal M&Ms on the flight, and everybody loves those. But apparently, Donald Trump said, you can only come with me on Air Force One if you're going to tell me you're going to vote in favor of the Senate health care bill when that comes around. Now, she did, but interestingly, she turned down the offer and said she wouldn't commit to voting for a bill whose text she hadn't seen yet, according to Republicans familiar with that conversation anyway. That was reported in the New York Times. Trump's offer to Capito came as Republican senators were pulling out all the stops to salvage their health care overhaul effort in the Senate. It is interesting that she did eventually vote for it, so it wasn't that she was opposed to it. But that seems so interesting, that she wouldn't trade a yes, which she eventually got around to, for a ride on Air Force One because she didn't want to commit to a yes on a bill she hadn't seen yet. That suggests that she actually was going to evaluate the bill rather than just vote the party line, which is always encouraging to hear, even if you don't really believe it. Now, it's somewhat, there's something of a damper on it, given that eventually the bill came out and it was A, so short on detail as to be laughable, and B, what detail was there was so horrible that there's no reason in the world why a representative from West Virginia should have agreed to vote for it. But then she read it and said yes to it. So, the other nugget I'll mine out of this one is, besides the fact that he's trying to bribe people for their votes with stupid stuff that are accoutrements of the office like this, but West Virginia voters obviously should take away from it that she had enough principle and presence of mind not to commit to the bill sight unseen. But then you should remember that once she had actually presumably read it and studied the content, at that point she said, yes, I'm ready. I will do this. It wasn't just a matter of my party needs me, which really shouldn't be acceptable as an excuse, but some people occasionally will excuse such things if they are committed partisans themselves. It wasn't that. She wasn't doing it for partisan purposes. She genuinely believed that that piece of garbage was good for West Virginia. So you should get good and mad about that. If you're listening to the show, it's too late. You're probably already good and mad about that. But tell your neighbors and explain it that way. See if that makes any difference. If you have a neighbor who's still thinking of voting for her, I don't know if they're salvageable, but you might, if you're interested in engaging in conversation about it, you might as well give it a try. I also think, I haven't done this research, but those of you with time on your hands or just a general interest in it, we know, of course, from every other event in this administration that there's always an old tweet from Donald Blabbermouth Trump that is horribly embarrassing to a normal human being in light of what he's doing now. Something directly contradictory that he complained about in the Obama administration that he's doing now. A big example would be, say, war in Afghanistan. Could be used as an example. On a smaller scale, though, I'm thinking that there's probably a complaint somewhere in the past, probably hinging on use or alleged use of the Lincoln bedroom as a political reward. Although maybe it may very well be that bribes of using as a bribe a flight on Air Force One, that kind of accusation. Now, Obama was smart enough not to make overt threats about that and actually try to horse trade something as dumb as a flight on Air Force One with members of Congress. I mean, I think he hoped that members of Congress were above making such a trade because it's not really that fantastic a deal. But, you know, I'm sure there was horse trading going on. And no doubt it was a very popular thing among Republicans at the time to accuse both Democratic presidents Clinton and Obama of trading favors for a stay in the Lincoln bedroom. That's a big meme with them, and I'll bet that there was such a thing. So if you find it, let me know. I just thought that was interesting that he was being that petty, and I'm glad he lost on that point. And I'm glad she didn't ride on the plane. I don't know. Somehow that's helpful. Let's see. Other things. Here's a funny one. Why not do a funny thing? The Daily Beast had an interesting story that I feel like you guys would appreciate this. I think it's a great idea, and it's something I want to start doing. I mean, it's that funny. This is a story, Ben Collins wrote up yesterday under this headline: "This guy tricks pro-Trump media into confusing every campaign rally for the 2016 Cavaliers championship parade." Yes, there are thousands of people in the viral image. Unfortunately, for far-right Twitter, they are sports fans, not Trumpkins. What's happening? The crowd in the picture shared by the Twitter user 10_GOP, TEN_GOP. Filled with what fans on social media believed were true believers of President Donald Trump, seems to go on forever. Throngs of supporters, for some reason wearing almost entirely maroon and gold, are squeezed between a nondescript office building and an arena with no visible name on it. "Massive crowd waiting outside for the Trump rally in Phoenix," tweeted 10GOP on Tuesday night, an influential pro-Trump Twitter account that calls itself the unofficial Twitter of Tennessee Republicans. But media says everyone hates Trump. I'm confused. That person was right to be confused. The aerial shot was not taken at Tuesday night's Trump rally, which filled up only part of the Phoenix Convention Center, which, by the way, I heard via Twitter this morning had a capacity, according to the fire marshal, of 5,000. This despite the fact that Trump claimed 15,000 were in attendance, though another source tells me that they are familiar with the venue and capacity is much higher than the fire marshal lists as the official capacity. I'm not sure how that kind of discrepancy arises, but almost everybody agrees that there were far fewer than the 15,000 Trump was claiming, but that's what Trump does. We shouldn't get used to it, but it is what he does. So once again, the aerial shot was not taken outside of the rally. It was a photo of the 2016 Cleveland Cavaliers NBA championship parade in Cleveland 427 days ago and 2,000 miles away. Chris McNeil had done it again. Who's Chris McNeil? Even a cursory check of my profile or timeline would reveal that I am all satire, sports, and lame dad jokes, McNeil says. He goes by reflog_18 on Twitter. Reflog. I don't know. That's supposed to be a joke about reblog, but that's a terrible verb anyway, but whatever. It's all ironic. Reflog18 is Chris McNeil. McNeil is a Columbus-based social media marketer, but is better known as Cleveland's most prolific sports troll. Cleveland Magazine even called him that. He's our troll because he's in on the joke. Cleveland's Caitlin Behrens wrote in April. He organized the Browns' perfect season parade when the team was set to go 0-16. The self-explanatory Johnny Manziel-free February, which made the New York Post, and other dumb things in Cleveland. And that's a quote. Then, yesterday, like he does any time there's a Trump rally, McNeil tweeted the Cavaliers parade photo from his verified Twitter account. Everybody's verified. My followers are used to me doing this, said McNeil. I put it out there, and then the fun starts. A little after 4 p.m. on Tuesday, McNeil tweeted this. Huge crowd outside tonight, getting ready for the Trump rally in Phoenix this evening. And then he tags it with Breitbart News and Fox and Friends and their addresses so that they make sure they see it, and now the followers who follow that feed might see it. Accounts like 10 GOP, the Tennessee Republicans, several other high-profile far-right personalities that frequently rail against fake news quickly ran with the photo. Ann Coulter even got in a retweet of the picture by a conservative radio host, which was later deleted. Joni Turner Law, that's a Twitter handle there, Joni. Joni Turner Law, who runs a website called Our Takedown that is dedicated to using every avenue, this is a quote, using every avenue available to legally, and it's misspelled here, go after CNN for using their fake news platform, also quickly shared this tweet. Please look at this. The Beatles never had crowds like this. This is us. This is USA. This is Trump, the tweet read. It has since been deleted. People get blinded by their own agendas easily, I've learned. That's true. We all do. That's what McNeil says. Even the comments from my followers give it away. I don't try and keep up he says, I don't try and keep up the muse too hard, but I assume he means ruse here. That's what makes it funny to me. But maybe he's saying muse ironically. Aha, now we're in on the joke. If this particular stunt sounds familiar, it's because McNeil has been posting the same photo for most major Trump rallies over the past year. It started last August when a Trump supporter identifying as Tatiana Wright on Twitter, which almost certainly means that she is in fact a Russian bot. They think everybody has Russian names, apparently. And we have plenty of Tatianas here. Who knows? But anyway, she said on Twitter, she on Twitter used the same Cavs parade photo in earnest, claiming it was a photo of Trump's rally in Jacksonville that day. Wright was immediately ridiculed by McNeil and his fans, who started reposting the crowd shot as a joke, along with pictures of then Cavs point guard Matthew Dellavedova. I'm guessing, I don't think I'm familiar with him, but I'm not up on all my Cavs. Is he Dellavedova or is Dellavedova? I don't know how they pronounce it. Claiming it was, this is the best part, Vice President Mike Pence. Wright quickly reversed course, claiming her incorrect photo was a, quote, protest to Hillary Clinton for faking polls, deleting emails, lying about Iran, Iraq, Syria. Yeah, right, sure, whatever. Still, hours later, Breitbart had used the Cleveland parade photo to falsely illustrate the crowd in Jacksonville. The next day, Gateway Pundit did the same, imploring his leaders to look at the massive line to Trump's event in Portland, Maine. Both websites later deleted the images without a retraction. After an accidentally successful trolling campaign, McNeil and the co-host of his podcast, everybody's got one, see, Matt Allaire, started linking Meld Cleveland gatherings and Trump rallies. Meld Cleveland? I don't know what that's supposed to mean. It seems like a typo. And Trump rallies, oh, I see, started melding Cleveland gatherings and Trump rallies. Maybe that's what it's supposed to mean. Until they became one amorphous connection of photos and sentences. We do it with more than just Trump rallies, too. Like any event, we will attach the pic of the Cavs parade and people will believe it, says Allaire. People will believe anything. Last September, for example, McNeil tagged Eric Trump in a tweet that read, "People got married at a Trump rally last week. The accompanying picture was what appears to be a pop-up wedding at a nearby empty Browns game." McNeil will play elaborate pranks on diehard fans of any politician, he said, but he messes with Trumpers more than others. There are a lot of important things politicians do while in office. Then there are the dumb things people get upset about online, like crowd sizes, he said. Oh, but the real president actually gets dumb about that online too. So it's not just his followers. I wish we would all do more laughing about the dumb stuff and coming together on the important stuff. Well, that's nice. That's a nice anodyne thing. That takes all the fun out of it, finishing up that article. But I thought you would enjoy that one. I think it's something we all ought to do. And I don't know, see who believes it. I've given up mostly, though, trying to figure out what's fake and what's a parody account and what isn't. I have at this point, I don't know. I'm sure there's a situation where I would be embarrassed by having believed a parody account, but most often the things I have to say, I would say with regard to something a parody account said or the real account had said. I mean, I don't think I've ever said anything that I wouldn't stand by otherwise, but I mean, I get the point. You don't want to be attributing to the real people things that parody accounts say. Although, like, I guess part of the reason I gave up trying to differentiate, well, for one thing, it's difficult to differentiate. You can't tell whether one is a parody account or not. You can check. You can find those things out. But it's not unlike things that the real people say, is what I mean. But also, I just don't even, at this point with the Trump administration, I don't even feel like I owe him the courtesy. And yeah, that probably feeds the fake news meme, but there's no way they're giving that meme up. And in the meantime, quite honestly, if it does damage to them at this point, great, fantastic. No one's reading my stupid Twitter account anyway. I'm not even verified, for God's sake. Anyway, let's see. There's a little bit more here. Lots of other things that came up that deserve some mention. Let me see what I can. Here's an interesting one here, also from Business Insider. They got my number over at Business Insider. I don't know how. I'm proud of myself for not liking Axios. Obviously, I have to kick the Business Insider and the Hill habit, but they tweet a lot of photos, and I'm visual that way. Trump keeps angrily calling Republican senators about the Russia scandal. I mean, it doesn't add a great deal in terms of data points to all this, but I mean, you know, keep doing the obstruction of justice, you dummy. I can't wait for you to get hung on that one. But it's just a weird thing. He keeps calling Republican senators and crying about Russia sanctions and we got to stop the investigation. And I just clearly has no idea how this just all becomes more evidence for the need to investigate further and to remove him from office, probably at some point, even in the minds of Republicans. I don't really know what he thinks he's going to get out of doing it. Some of the people mentioned here, Bob Corker is in there, Tom Tillis. I mean, all these people getting phone calls from Trump whining about this stuff. These guys would be solid Republican votes, but for the fact that they must be getting annoyed at getting screamed at by this idiot president. I find that all very weird. Also, of course, this brings up again the point that he's once again has used the Phoenix rally as a chance to needle Jeff Flake, who he very creatively has called the Flake, Jeff Flake. And calling for his ouster, his defeat in the primary. And, backstory there, I don't know if it's really worth anything, but apparently a lot of Republican senators, both sides of the aisle really, but, it's of some interest that it includes Republican senators, are annoyed with Trump for continuing on this campaign because, I guess, Flake is very personable on a personal level with them. They say unfailingly polite, at least in person. It doesn't help that he's stealing health care from people and voting for these horrible things. That's all. If you can compartmentalize, and I guess those guys really have to because they work pretty closely together, ordinarily on a lot of things, because the government usually does many things. This one isn't. But in the past, Republicans and Democrats, they fight politically, but they can be personally pleasant, at least, with one another. And I guess everybody kind of likes Jeff Flake, and they're angry at seeing Trump bully him, especially, over nothing. He ended up providing his votes anyway. Let's see. Other interesting developments. We'll save the details on this one for another day when we have some more time, but people are rapidly coming to the conclusion that yes, as they do here in New York Magazine, that Russian guy who attended the Trump Tower meeting is almost definitely a spy. I think we had all come to that conclusion, but we'll let somebody else with more organized thoughts do the explaining there. There's more about the strange use of Icelandic banks and venture capital funds to launder Russian money into Trump projects. We'll get to a couple of those as well. And let's see, what else have we to shoehorn into the last couple of minutes here. Oh, yes, I did pick up on this piece, Josh Holland writing at The Nation. And we may just stick to the headline and play off of that. But let's see what's in the substance of the article. Russia's attacks on democracy aren't only a problem for America, and that's a problem for skeptics of Russian meddling. You remember way back when? I'm so old, I remember when I was a skeptic of Russian meddling, or really a skeptic of how did it look for us to be talking about Russia all the time. It did feel a little bit odd. But it didn't take that much to bring me around. It was just evidence that kind of brought me around to the idea that, hey, yeah, maybe a lot of this did happen. But it's a problem among, I don't know, how would you even describe them? It seems unfair to the real description to say that they're Bernie Sanders voters. I mean, they may all, among the left-leaning people who are skeptics of Russian interference, I guess the vast majority of them may also have been Bernie Sanders voters, but it's clearly not the case that the majority of Bernie Sanders voters, period, think the Russia stuff is bogus. But it does bring up an important point, because there is a serious contingent, and they're vocal and they're smart about how they express themselves, and they convince a lot of people that we may be going overboard in this. I was actually most interested in the headline only not because of the left-leaning people who make it their business to be Russia story skeptics, but rather the right-leaning people who make it their business to be Russia story skeptics. In particular, once again, I want to remind everybody, Paul Ryan, Kevin McCarthy, Mitch McConnell. McConnell was not in that meeting that was taped. When I bring up McCarthy, I'm specifically thinking about the tape in which we hear laid out quite plainly that, it's true. They know that Russia's attacks on democracy aren't only a problem for America. It's happening all over the place in all parts of Europe and other places around the world. The Russians, as a matter of policy, are interfering in democratic elections everywhere in pursuit of their own interests, to undermine strong democracies where they exist that would otherwise put themselves in opposition to totalitarianism as it's practiced in Putin's oligarchy. But McCarthy and Ryan in that tape very specifically say, I know about this. I've been briefed about this, particularly with respect to the Ukraine. And I know that it is rumored that they are trying to do the same thing here in the United States of America. And then they go on to say, yes, but let us agree to keep our mouths shut about it because it will inure to the benefit of Republicans. Our candidate might win. Therefore, shut up about our concerns about American democracy, even though I am alarmed at the level at which they are doing this to other Western countries, including allies, and possibly right here at home. But let's ignore it for political gain. McConnell came to that conclusion, I guess, separately, at least outside of that conversation, but did exactly the same thing. Holland's point is a little bit different. We might as well close out the show by discussing it. Virtually all of the debates over the intelligence community's conclusion that Russia waged a multifaceted campaign to influence the 2016 election look at the issue through a prism of U.S. domestic politics or the bilateral relationship between the United States and Russia. That's understandable, given what a shocking outcome the election produced, but it also sidesteps the troubling reality that the Kremlin's attempts to influence other countries' electoral processes have been a problem across Europe for over a decade, and that our intelligence agencies weren't alone in sounding the alarm. And that's a serious problem for those who are dismissive of the evidence of Russian intervention. Russia's efforts in our election may have been its most dramatic and arguably most fruitful, but evidence suggests it was hardly an isolated event. U.S. intelligence community's conclusions about how Russia intervened in our elections fits a pattern the European analysts say dates back to 2007, when Vladimir Putin told the Munich Security Conference that American dominance in a unipolar world was pernicious and that NATO's expansion represents a serious provocation that reduces the level of mutual trust. The Kremlin saw a pressing need to confront a series of anti-Russian color revolutions in the former Soviet states during the early 2000s. Sebastian Rotella reported for ProPublica that Russian leaders believed the United States was using soft power means, such as the media and diplomacy, to cause trouble in Russia's domain. The Russians decided to fight fire with fire, as they saw it. USA Today International Affairs correspondent Oren Dorel reported that Russian sabotage of Western computer systems started that same year. It was also in 2007 that Russians began experimenting with information warfare in Estonia, followed soon after by attempts to disrupt in Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Finland, Bosnia, and Macedonia, according to the Washington Post's Dana Priest and Michael Birnbaum. There's a lot more to it, of course, but the main point of Holland's article here was, if you're still a big Russia skeptic, and, there are lots of them out there, the evidence is mounting that this is what Russians do. And I would even bet that there's a lot of Russia skeptics that believe that, but just don't believe that the program was as advanced or as far-reaching as we're told it was in the United States. And they may even have a point there. It may very well be that there are two different branches of a similar policy, and it just so happens that the most obvious stuff is that connected directly to Donald Trump, because he's dumb, he's easy to manipulate, and he can be bought very easily, and they just sort of grafted that onto a generalized computer-based information warfare campaign. And they were never really necessarily supposed to meet in the middle, but then they did because of how deep the Trump dumb runs. Anyway, we'll be discussing that further, no doubt, tomorrow and into next week. Now it's time to stay tuned for the Thursday after show with Wink and Justice, the Thank God It's Jovadi version. And the first time in a long time I've been able to preview what they're doing. A federal judge rules Arizona's 7-year-long ban on ethnic studies is unconstitutional. Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke is strangely silent about the white nationalist rally that will be held on federal land in San Francisco this Saturday. And a little more after this.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
What else have they got? Trump's New York lawyers sue Greenpeace for racketeering and using fake climate science to protest the Dakota Access Pipeline. On the last half, Florida lawmakers will review the law that has allowed the arrest and deportation of injured, undocumented workers rather than paying them workers' compensation. All that coming up next.